What up, everybody? It's the Caleb Show today. Dave Hooker is off for today, so Caleb Calhoun here with you, and Caleb Jarreau from Omaha is going to do the show with us. We really appreciate him for doing this. Sorry, guys, I don't have the fun sound effects that Dave has, so none of those today, but still a lot of great content. Caleb Jarreau, how are you?
I'm good. Without the sound effects, I might have to learn how to pronounce Nico's last name.
I know, right? How's Omaha? How's it treating you out there?
It's good. It's hot, which was expected, but stadium's nice. Games have been super fun, and it's like baseball heaven, so I can't complain.
Flying from Tennessee to Nebraska and complaining about the heat. It's kind of a great bit of irony there. We've got a monster show for you guys today. We got more College World Series coverage. We've got some recruiting news related to Tennessee and honestly, related to schools that are rivals of Tennessee. Some other news with conference realignment is the Pac-12. Have they made their move? And the NCAA panel is recommending an end to marijuana testing, where Jarreau and I are the young ones in the group, so it's perfect that we're the ones who get to talk about this. So we're definitely going to dive into that. But I want to start with the College World Series. Jarreau, you pretty much nailed it when you picked LSU over the weekend. You said Tennessee would have a hard time hitting off LSU, and boy, did they ever. I mean, you thought they were going to make that push late in the game with that 2-run shot, but it just was a little too much. So, question for you, Jarreau, do you think this is anything for Tennessee to panic about? I know they're in the losers bracket, but I feel like this was a loss you kind of expected, right?
Yeah, I really think you can just chalk it up to bad luck. I mean, if you think about in 2021 when they came to Omaha, they had to face Virginia's lefty ace Abbott, who is not allowed to run in the MLB yet since getting called up. So they really just get super bad luck in having to face, the best pitcher in college baseball that year. And this year, it just happens to be the best pitcher in college baseball in probably 20 years. So I wouldn't panic about it. You saw Hunter Inslee flash some pops of power, like you said, with the 2-run shot. He was really on Paul Skeens' fastball, and he's a guy that can hit better against righties than lefties, which is kind of strange from the right side. But I wouldn't panic about it. You see Stanford's ace today, who threw 156 pitches a week ago, so I highly doubt he'll be at his best. But, I mean, I think the bat's a wake-up. You just kind of have to chalk that one up as the guy is the best in baseball, and you can't really do much about it.
Yeah, they were kind of the victim of the top two prospects in this year's draft because Paul Skeens got him, and then Dylan Cruz went 2 for 5, got a run on him. So just seems like it seemed like they were going to be outmatched from the start. And it would have, had they beaten LSU in that first game, that would have been a house money win, right? That's like winning a road game in a 7-game series in the NBA playoffs because they were facing Skeens.
Yeah, basically. And, I mean, they might match up with LSU again in the losers bracket if LSU loses to Wake Forest and Tennessee wins today. And I like their chances a lot better when LSU doesn't have the best pitcher in baseball on the mound. And I think a lot of people would say the same thing. So I think you're right. If they would have won that game against Paul Skeens, it would have been wow, we didn't expect this to happen. But now they have to fight through the losers bracket on the tougher side of the bracket as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Joel. Let's talk about Stanford for a minute because I know they raced through 156 pitches a week ago, like you said, but they are still top 10. And, I mean, Tennessee has gotten a brutal draw, whether they're in the winners or the losers bracket with this College World Series, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, if you look on the other side of the bracket, you've got Oral Roberts, Virginia, and then Florida is the best team on the other side, and they almost lost to Oral Roberts last night. So the other side of the bracket would have been a lot more friendly, but Tennessee gets to fight through a bunch of national seeds. And Stanford, like you said, was the number 8 national seed. They swing it very well, and they're going to have their ace on the mound. So I'm curious to see if Tennessee if they can get hits, because you Chase Dolander throwing, you trust that he can give you 6, 7 good innings, and you still have Chase Burns and a lot of other quality relievers left in the bullpen. So I think today really just comes down to if you get the good Chase Dolander, and then if Tennessee can put up 3, 4 runs on Quinn Matthews. I mean, it's a week's rest and he's conditioned for, but he threw 100 pitches the weekend before, 156 last weekend. Like, he's been the guy carrying them through the postseason. And at some point, you have to assume he's going to run out of gas.
Yeah, and which is an even better sign for Tennessee because if this gets to a bullpen game, this favors Tennessee significantly, doesn't it?
Yeah, they have so many arms left in the bullpen. And that's another thing about just being in the losers bracket is Tennessee has so many arms they can just throw at you that being in the losers bracket doesn't hurt them as much as other teams. Because, I mean, you still have a Seth Halverson in the bullpen. Chase Burns is still there. I mean, you have Camden Sewell, who's probably still fresh. I mean, A.J. Russell, the freshman, you can probably trust him to start a game. There's just so many guys who can throw at with so many different looks that I think Tennessee is in a good spot as long as the bats come around.
The Stanford, how many innings do they like to go with their ace? I mean, if you're talking 156 pitches, we're talking what? I mean, you might be pushing a complete game, right? If you have to.
Yeah, he threw a CG last weekend, but Stanford's head coach said, I guess it was on Saturday night or Saturday during the day, that he expects Matthews to give them 6 or 7. So I guess they're saying he'll probably throw about 100-ish, 90-ish pitches if he's rolling. You can't let his pitch count get too high. I find it hard to believe that he'll be 100%. I mean, it would probably take a month after throwing 156 pitches for him to be back to 100%.
Yeah, and if they're using him that much, then you would have to guess that they don't have a lot of confidence in their bullpen at all to get them out of these games.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, their bullpen is very iffy. They have a couple arms, but it's nothing like – if Tennessee brings in Chase Burns, you know what you're getting. Theirs is – if you get what you expect with some of their righties specifically, then you're doing good. But a lot of their guys are just – might come out and walk 3 guys or might come out and look like a Cy Young winner. So there's a lot of inconsistency in their bullpen. I feel like if Tennessee can get Quinn Matthews out of the game early, that they'll have a really good chance of winning. Or if he's not good, he might just get himself out early. I really do find it hard to believe that their coach says the extra day of rest will make everything okay after throwing 156 pitches in 2023.
Yeah, and for those that are interested, Stanford, Tennessee is at 2 o'clock Eastern on ESPN and ESPN Plus today. You can catch it there. And then LSU and Wake Forest is tonight at 7 p.m. on ESPN and ESPN Plus. If Tennessee loses, they're out. If Tennessee wins, when do they play next?
They would play tomorrow night. I think it's 7 Eastern. So they'll have the late game tomorrow night. So basically after tomorrow night, if they win, they'll be in the Final Four, and they'll have to beat the winner of LSU and Wake Forest twice to get to the championship.
And so that becomes a little tricky again then, though, because if you're Tennessee, then you really want Wake Forest to win, because beating LSU once is one thing, but if you beat them twice, you're likely to face Skeens again, aren't you?
Yeah, I would say if Wake Forest lost today to LSU, that Skeens would probably be available on that first game, because I think they get the Wednesday off. I'm not 100% sure. So I think that game would be Thursday. So then you're looking at almost a week's rest. I don't think they'd let Skeens roll 100 pitches, but I could see him getting 3-4 innings. Or LSU might just save him if they don't win the first game and then just tell him to get us to the championship in the second game. So you are running the risk that if you don't put LSU out tomorrow, that Skeens will be back, and that's basically a free win if he's on the mound. Even I would say Skeens not at 100% is still better than almost every college pitcher.
Yeah, I kind of see that too. I think the Nats are the Nats scouting him or Dylan Cruz? I can't remember. They're scouting one of the two.
I don't think the Nats want a pitcher. No, I know that Dylan Cruz and the Pirates have been linked. But then you run into the issue, if you're looking at from an MLB draft standpoint, do you want a guy like Skeens where if he gets hurt, God forbid, your draft stock, you wasted a draft pick whenever you have Dylan Cruz, who has over a 500 on-base percentage playing in the SEC? I would not want to be those managers and GMs making that decision.
Yeah, very true. Going to the message boards real quick. Rocky Top Tom says, good morning. Travis is asking if Dave got too hammered at Bonnaroo. I'm not going to comment. I have no idea. He says Skeens gained 13 pounds, 7 miles an hour on his fastball. Kind of looks like he went through puberty again, all in about 12 months. Cough, cough. Is Travis insinuating something there? Travis, we're going to talk about certain types of drugs later in the show, but not that one. Jarreau, are you ready for this? Just for the heck of it, Dave's going to kill me, but we make enough hooker jokes. So did you get one of the shirts that Oral Roberts was selling this weekend?
I saw the shirts, but I did not.
So I'm just going to.
They were selling like crazy, though. There was a long line.
Oh, I'm sure. for those who are interested, Oral Roberts is selling shirts that say "You can't beat Oral." Yes, they are selling those shirts at the College World Series. Now, by the way, this is like Oral Roberts. Like for those who don't know, like that is the school. The Oral Roberts the human was the person who really started the televangelist movement, the very conservative televangelist movement. So for them to be selling "You can't beat Oral" shirts is actually it's gold. It's hilarious. I love it. So
And then unfortunately, Oral got beat last night.
That's true. That turns out you can beat Oral. And so yeah, they got eliminated. No, they didn't get eliminated, right?
They won their first game, so they play a losers bracket game tomorrow.
Yeah, so the only team eliminated as of right now is Virginia, who lost last night to TCU. And so who you got today, Jarreau? Tennessee, Stanford, LSU, Wake Forest? Who's winning each one?
Shoot. I would go Tennessee in the Tennessee-Stanford game. I feel like the bats will come around. And like I said, I don't think Stanford's relying a lot on Quinn Matthews, and I just don't see a way where he's 100%. I mean, even if he was superhuman, you have to be tired at some point. 156 pitches is a lot. And they weren't – another thing about them was they were not low-stress pitches. He was playing in a super regional game where Texas had base runners on basically the entire game. So you can't make the argument that he was out there throwing, bases empty 150 pitches because they were not. And then looking at LSU and Wake Forest's pitchers are just insane. So I feel like LSU can score a lot, but LSU's pitching is bad. So I can see that game turning into like a high scoring game with Wake Forest coming out on top.
Okay, so it's funny enough, the Vegas agrees with you. They got Tennessee -130 in this, Tennessee -130 in this game, even though Stanford is ranked top 10 and Tennessee is not, which is intriguing. Wake -170. So over-unders on this. Over-under for Tennessee, Stanford, 9. You think there'll be more or less runs scored?
That's a good – I was thinking it was going to be like 5-4 or like 5-3, something like that. So I guess I would have to say I'll go under. I don't see – I mean, Tennessee's pitching is good. I don't see a lot of runs being scored in that game. Now they could play in 4 hours. I'm completely wrong, but
right. Heck, we need guys when we start this peer-to-peer sports with Zen Sports, which portion of the show is brought to you by. We might have Jarreau setting some lines for it because he set the same lines that Vegas is setting right now.
Yeah, I did think. I mean, I thought it would be like 5-4 Tennessee, just because. I mean, Stanford can swing it, but it's whenever you bring in that bullpen, it's like virtually impossible to hit. And like I said over and over, I don't see Quinn Matthews being as good as what he was.
Okay. Papa J says Tennessee showed some class with the tip of the cap. And Travis says take the over. Tennessee scores 9 on their own. Okay. Intriguing. A little bit of somewhat what you're saying, which is you don't know if you have faith in Quinn Matthews again. So we're going to move on, guys. Jarreau is our baseball expert. He is also our recruiting expert. And Tennessee picked up a commitment over the weekend, a guy they had to get, absolutely had to get. We all agree they had to get Boo Carter, an athlete committed at the 40-40 Club in New York City. And he committed to Tennessee. We always thought he was committing to Tennessee, but there was a debate at the end that he might go to Michigan. I know Colorado was in there for a while. Boo Carter is a 4-star. Could play wide receiver or defensive back out of Bradley Central in Chattanooga. It would have been a devastating blow for Tennessee if they didn't get him to commit. This was an absolute must, and they got him. Jarreau, how big of a deal is Boo Carter's commitment? Or is it not a big deal, just they're hitting par because they had to get him?
I would say it is a pretty big commitment just for the fact that Michigan made a very, very big push in these final weeks. He was on a Michigan official visit last weekend, the weekend before this past one. So, I mean, it was a big pickup, and something that Josh Heupel's emphasized that we did not see, Jeremy Pruitt, Butch Jones emphasize is recruiting the state of Tennessee. Whenever you have a guy like Boo Carter who lives an hour away from campus, that's a guy you have to get to Tennessee. And in the past, those guys would end up at Georgia, Alabama, or like a Michigan. So also another thing is it was good PR for Tennessee. His recruitment was a pretty big thing. He was very active on Twitter throughout his whole recruitment. So getting him to Tennessee is another big thing in that standpoint. But I think if you had to ask me what the biggest impact would be, it is just locking down Tennessee, because you see that with Georgia. Like the guys in Georgia that they want, they're going to get. So Tennessee has to keep doing that, especially in a talent-rich state.
Well, I am going to tell you, Jarreau, that one of the reasons that doesn't happen, and that goes back to the Fulmer days, is Tennessee recruits have traditionally been overrated. Dave gets annoyed when I say that, but Tennessee high school football just isn't on the level that the other states are on. And in the past 10 years with recruiting rankings, that seemed to change on paper, but it didn't bear out when they got to college. And I think there's a lot of politicking that went on. The most obvious example is Jalen Hurd, who was a 5-star and totally flamed out, and Butch Jones was trying to play him over Alvin Kamara when Alvin Kamara was clearly better. So I would say I understand where it comes from, but it seems like Boo Carter. So I'm raising a red flag on Edwin Spillman for that. Sorry, I know people think I'm a little unfair with that, but I am raising a red flag. I think Boo Carter is good in his own right. He had a lot of schools targeting him. He's going to play, you think, defensive back at Tennessee, right?
Yeah, Tennessee's recruiting him more for the secondary.
Okay, which they obviously need. And at 6 feet, 180 pounds, he should be okay back there. Do you think? Curiously, it's funny when you told us over the weekend that Boo Carter was being offered to play wide receiver at Michigan and defensive back at Tennessee. But if you're an athlete, you'd rather play wide receiver at Tennessee and defensive back at Michigan, given the systems, wouldn't you?
It is a very weird situation. Obviously, he plays both in high school, so I don't think I don't know how much he cares about it. Obviously, I mean, that could change. Like we saw Cam Seldon was a wide receiver, and he got to campus and turned into one of the best running backs in spring football. So position changes aren't immune, but I do have been told that Boo Carter was being recruited by Tennessee to play in the secondary. And obviously right now, if you had to pick between wide receiver and secondary, what some of the biggest needs for Tennessee are, I guess you'd have to point at the secondary.
Yeah, far and away easily. I've made predictions on the show, and actually I'm going to see I want to see what your thoughts are, because you haven't made it with us, which is I've made an insistence that one true freshman that's going to start is either going to be Jordan Matthews or Ricky Gibson at cornerback this year. And I want to know if you agree with me on that.
Yeah, I could see. I've been high on Jordan Matthews specifically because he's a guy that passed up, whenever you think of DBs, you think of LSU and maybe in Alabama or Ohio State, and he passed up those schools that come to Tennessee. So when those schools are recruiting a defensive back, you have to assume that they think he could impact year one. And to come to Tennessee, I would expect him to play on the field. Also for those guys too, and we talked about it a little bit with BYU, the BYU transfer. Why can't I think of his name? Defensive back.
Gabe Judy Lally?
Yes, Judy Lally. We talked about learning defensive back is not as difficult as maybe a safety position. So for him and even some of the true freshmen, if you just teach them some of the basic concepts of defensive back with the defense that Tennessee runs, they could probably excel pretty early on the field. So I wouldn't be surprised with either of those guys, but I think specifically Jordan Matthews would have the biggest impact.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because you're right. It's Tennessee's best defensive backs, their best cornerbacks over the past 5 years were recruited as athletes. Most notably, Alontae Taylor and Bryce Thompson were both recruited as athletes. I'm with you on Jordan Matthews. What I said about Tennessee, it's the reverse with Louisiana. Louisiana, being from there, but Louisiana recruits are constantly underrated. And I think it just has something to do with LSU doesn't have much of a presence online the way the other schools do. So,
well, I mean, think about Justin Jefferson was a 3-star that nobody wanted.
Yeah.
And now he's making him lots of money playing for the Vikings and won a ring. So, I mean, that's just one example of it. I like what you said about the athletes, though, because I think when you look at a guy like Boo Carter, who plays wide receiver and defensive back, if you have to remember wide receiver plays and you're playing the position, it becomes a lot easier on the other side to recognize what the wide receivers are doing and being familiar with the offensive concepts and stuff like that. So I think that could play a role as well. But we talked about it before, too. I really just think defensive back is a easy position to stick somebody in and teach them quickly to play, easier than like a safety. Because we saw like Wesley Walker struggled a little bit last year learning safety so quickly, but now that he has an offseason, I'm sure he'll be fine. And especially in Tennessee's offense, I just feel like you said, like some of those early guys will probably get a lot of reps this season just because there's still not as much depth as I'm sure Willie Martinez would like in that secondary.
Yeah, and Walker came on towards the end of last season as he started to develop a little more. So you're right. And Dave and I said the same thing. Fred White on Friday somewhat disagrees with us, but I think cornerback it's second to running back in terms of positions. It's not hard to pick up quickly. Maybe wide receiver. I don't know. Cornerback, wide receiver. In Josh Heupel's offense, I don't think there's much picking up to do at wide receiver at all.
But
I think wide receiver might be pushing it a little bit just because in Josh Heupel's offense, there is a lot of like the option route trees that you do have to remember and know what to do. But I would say running back would be another easy position to pick up. Obviously, yes, you do have to know when you run out, and especially in Josh Heupel's offense with the running back in the slot, it might be a little tougher. But I can see running back, cornerback being positions where if you're not 100% comfortable with the playbook, you can still succeed.
Yep. Going to the message boards, Reggie.Tom says we need to lock down William Nwaneri. We're going to probably talk about him in the next segment. Ask if we're going to be around for the NCAA live stream this evening. Reggie.Tom, I'm not sure about the NCAA live stream. Tell me about that a little more. Travis says he tried to troll Michigan fans on Twitter about Boo Carter, and they were not trying to get Vol Twitter smoke. But man, could you just imagine if Twitter were around in 1997 with Michigan and Charles Woodson beat Peyton Manning for the Heisman? Then they would have gotten Vol Twitter smoke anyway. There's Elias Gray says it's been decades since Bradley Central did much at Tennessee. Okay, I mean, I will say this, Elias. Chattanooga is. They're more accurately evaluated at Chattanooga than they are coming out of the Nashville region. I will say that. Chattanooga had, I believe, most notably Reggie White came out of Chattanooga. And
I also think, Caleb, with the private schools, it doesn't matter as much because they play statewide, and usually your private schools have a lot of good talent.
That's true. That's a really good point. I more base it off of where I think recruiting rankings sometimes overvalue players a lot of times based on the politicking. We know Tennessee targets Nashville kids specifically from Nashville, so I think they might overvalue kids from that area. But that's a great point with high school. And Reggie.Tom says if he were Boo Carter, he would want to play defensive back at Tennessee. Now that's a question. You're Boo Carter. Yeah, wide receiver at Tennessee is like that's the dream because Josh Heupel's going to he's going to scheme you open all the time. But you're more likely to play honestly, from the day you step on campus, defensive back. So, Jarreau, if you're Boo, would you prefer playing defensive back to receiver?
If he doesn't mind defensive back, like I know some athletes just hate playing on one side of the ball, but they do it because if they go to like a small high school or something in that manner. But if Boo doesn't mind playing defensive back and enjoys that, then at Tennessee, I would 100% go defensive back. Because you look at Tennessee, if you're a wide receiver as a freshman or sophomore and you're not getting the job done, there's no waiting around. They're bringing in a transfer to play, like a Dante Thornton is coming in and taking your spot. With defensive back, I mean, at the rate Tennessee's going right now, they need depth, they need bodies, and I can see Boo Carter making an instant impact next season as soon as he's on campus, like you said. So that is a really good point. I know a ton of players talk about playing time being a huge factor in their recruitment, but I could see that being a huge factor for Boo because, I mean, I'm sure they're promising him early playing time because if he's successful at DB, he'll have early playing time at Tennessee right now.
Yep. And Mr. Jones says Michigan fans are boo-hooing. Well played, Mr. Jones. Travis points out there's been 5 or 6 kids from East Tennessee recently make the league. You're actually right, Travis. I actually would say East Tennessee kids are underrated. Just Nashville kids are overrated a lot of times because it's becoming a big market, and I think a lot of recruiting services are based out of there. Portions of the program brought to you by City Heating and Air Conditioning. Might not need a new unit until if your AC isn't working, just go to cityheatandair.com. 50 years in Tennessee, cityheatandair.com. Integrity matters. We're going to take a 2-minute break. When we get back, got a little more recruiting to talk about. Tennessee had a big weekend of visitors and some craziness with a couple of other SEC teams on the recruiting trail. So we're going to talk about all that and more in 2 minutes. Stick with us.
And Craving Wings South North Shore location, where we've heard people say that you can get the best wings in East Tennessee. Pero ¿quién es este? El número 87, Jacob Warren.
I'll just do 6 in my sauce 87, please.
Imposible, señorita. Dale 6 más. Look at these wings. Perfectas, deliciosas, fantásticas.
Man, I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds awesome. How do you say fresh, never frozen in Spanish?
Frescas, nunca congeladas. Make your way to Craving Wings and get you 6 más.
But what was funny about Kate is we were a full continuum of care at that time. We had detox, we had inpatient, we had outpatient. So we were doing a lot of the things that we do now. But now we just do them so much better. It's really a simple program, but we're complicated people. I am what I am. And now I got to do something about it.
You can take your life back. Call Cadis today.
Got cataracts? We can fix that. Never miss another moment. With a little help from Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn at cctis.com.
Do you want to own the more that owns every job? Then get to Vassey Lawn and Garden in Cleveland and get you a Toro. I'm David Vassey, here to talk to you about Toro. With a Toro Zero Turn, you'll get more out of every minute and you'll reach the finish line faster. At Vassey's, we like to say, no matter if you're mowing 3 acres a week or 11 lawns a day, homeowners and business owners alike find confidence in equipment they can trust from top to bottom.
Vassey Lawn and Garden, Highway 60 North in Cleveland.
Man alive, it's worth the drive.
Our family has been creating jewelry since 1986, each piece unique with a story all its own. I'm Rick Terry with Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. I'm a jeweler, and I want to be your jeweler. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler. My family and staff look forward to serving you. So please come see us. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut and downtown on Gay Street, right next to the Tennessee Theater.
Welcome back. Going to the message boards a little bit. Mr. Jones says DB is receiver, only your QB is constantly trying to throw interceptions. Elias Bradley is just particularly surprising since they were like a 2000 student in high school. Last consistent starter of theirs at UT was Dale Jones. Interesting. Great perspective, Elias. Appreciate that. Sticking with recruiting, Tennessee had a pretty big weekend of official visitors for the third weekend in June to coincide with the big Boo Carter pickup. They had 8 open prospects and 4 committed prospects. We talked a lot about them on Friday with Jarreau, but now we're back to talk about them again to see how things went. So, Jarreau, as far as you're aware, how did this weekend of hosting go?
I would say overall, the weekend went pretty well. The only thing that came out of this weekend is you saw a lot of kids who were a lot of prospects who were leaning Tennessee, continued to lean Tennessee, which is good to see. But you also saw a lot of those offensive tackles we talked about on Friday that were more Georgia are still leaning towards Georgia. At least it seems so early on after this weekend. So from that standpoint, it may be a failure if you're looking to swing some of those kids. But a lot of these guys are recruitments that are going to go long, that you don't see a commitment expected here soon. In particular, you look at a guy like cornerback Kai Bates, who took an official to Tennessee this weekend, loved it, but he's also going to LSU next weekend. So that's probably the biggest competition for him. If his visit goes well at LSU, might he commit to LSU during his visit like we saw with Florida? That's something we don't see often with Tennessee official visits. So overall, I'd say the weekend went well. You had some of your commitments peer recruiting other guys too, which is always a good thing, I think. And I would say biggest thing out of this weekend is Braylon Staley, wide receiver out of South Carolina, is probably going to trend more towards Tennessee now. I know Clemson and Miami are big in his recruitment, so we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, that's going to be a bit tricky, obviously, him being from South Carolina, but Tennessee's obviously got – Tennessee is the dream place for a wide receiver right now, and so that's a big deal. We mentioned earlier Edwin Spillman was there. That was his second visit. I would guess Edwin Spillman's a lock, right? He's just taking his visits.
Yeah, he'll be a lock. I mean, he's somebody who, like we talked about with Boo Carter, really, if you get that highly ranked and work that hard, you kind of earn the recruitment process. But he's continued to stay locked in on Tennessee, and he was out there pure recruiting guys.
Oh, so he was out there recruiting guys for Tennessee, even though he hasn't committed to Tennessee.
That's what he talked highly of Tennessee to other prospects, is what I was told. So
okay,
I would say that he's still basically a Tennessee lock, and like we talked about with Boo Carter, I wouldn't stress about him taking other visits. I know Notre Dame is a school that really, really wants him and is pushing hard, and they have a defensive-minded head coach, so that might play a role in his mind. But I would be more surprised than I probably ever have in my life if he didn't commit to Tennessee.
Yeah, and I know we talk about defensive-minded head coaches, but what Tennessee is showing is that it's not really preventing you from being able to be an NFL draft prospect. I mean, 2 years ago, Alontae Taylor was the second pick in the draft, was picked in the second round of the draft. And so Tennessee is still having its fair share of players. I mean, Byron Young got selected in this year's NFL draft. They're having its fair share of defenders go, even if they're giving up a lot of points. It's not preventing you from standing out as a defensive player. It seems like GMs and NFL scouts are recognizing this. And guys, look, at the end of the day, players commit to try to go to the NFL. You can think they committed to your school. They're committing to try to go to the NFL. So this talking point matters a lot. And as far as I'm aware, Jarreau, Heupel's system doesn't seem to be a barrier for players trying to get to the NFL on defense.
No, and I think on defense, like you said, it's very friendly to those guys who are trying to put up stats and make a run for the NFL because it's so aggressive. So you see linebackers always on the line. No, I wouldn't say always, mostly on the line blitzing. You see a guy like Byron Young who can just pin his ears back and get after the quarterback most downs. So the system that Banks runs for Tennessee is friendly for a linebacker or a defensive lineman or an edge rusher who likes to get after the quarterback. And I can see that with a guy like Spillman, who's highly ranked. Obviously, he's an in-state guy, so that helps as well. But even when you're going out for, like we talked earlier about Williams and Warney, like those guys want to attack the quarterback and get after the quarterback, and that defensive scheme is helpful. You do have to be a little extra conditioned. I will say that. That has been talked about because your offense is only on the field for a minute. But still, you get to blitz the quarterback and play super aggressive instead of sitting back.
Right, which you would think, given the fact that he's 265 pounds, that would have to be a selling point for Kamari and Franklin, right?
Yeah, he's a guy that wants to be an edge rusher and be on the edge and getting after a quarterback over the interior. And his visit, from what I was told, went really well. He's a higher-ranked recruit, and you could see people predict him a bunch of different places, but I would say Tennessee has at least solidified themselves as a top contender for him. He's going to officially visit LSU and Auburn as well, so we'll have to see how those visits go and what he says about them. But I would say right now Tennessee is definitely trending for him.
Yeah, and for those who are curious, if the visits make a difference and you're choosing between Tennessee, Auburn, and LSU, that is where Tennessee wins. No offense to LSU, Jarreau, no offense to Louisiana, but Tennessee's campus is nicer than LSU's campus.
And I would say their football facilities, Tennessee's now, especially with the planned renovations, can go mano-a-mano with any school in the country. So if a kid is looking strictly on facilities, I would say Tennessee could also win in that category.
Yes, it's a very good sign that a Mississippi kid, that Ole Miss and Mississippi State are not the main schools in the running, obviously. So I think for a kid from the Memphis area, Tennessee can beat Auburn for a kid from that area, and they should be able to beat LSU. That can go either way, but I think they should easily beat Auburn for Kamari and Franklin if they want him. So, I mean, y'all are going to hate me for saying this still, but Auburn is the worst place to live, the SEC. Like, I would rather not be a football coach than coach at Auburn. I'm sorry. I just don't want to live there or be there ever. Mississippi State's right there, too. Those two schools. What's your least favorite, Jarreau? I don't know how many you've been to. What's your least favorite place to be in the SEC?
I don't know. Gainesville seems just like it's always hot. There's nothing really there. I mean, you're close to the beach, I guess, but you still have to drive a good 30 minutes. I've always disliked Gainesville, I guess I'd say. I don't know. I haven't been to many yet. Been to Lexington, I didn't really like, but I just don't like how hectic it was and the streets don't make much sense. But I'd say probably Gainesville. Something about it.
Yeah, but the average hotness factor of Gainesville girls, like, I think helps Gainesville a little bit.
Yeah, but then you have the weather. The average hotness factor of the weather is not.
That is true. Fun. That is a very, very.
They do. I mean, they do sell. And you have to play right now. It's Billy Napier, who's not very proven, because they did pretty good this weekend, but we'll see. I don't know. I'll visit a lot more SEC schools this fall, and I would say Gainesville has a lot of work to do in my mind.
Yeah, I can see that. We'll go to Florida, too, in a minute. To the message board, a couple of great points. Ranking Top Tom talked about he doesn't understand why every single receiver is not breaking down the door to play at Tennessee right now. ESPN pushing Ohio State and USC. Big media is always say this. Okay, record.com, that's changing. Trust me, media is loving Tennessee right now. A lot of establishment people are loving Tennessee because the offense is so much fun to watch. And they are bringing down the door to play at Tennessee. If they're not going to Tennessee, it's because of playing time. They all want to go there. And
I think once Tennessee has a couple receivers or one receiver make it and have success in the NFL, that the Ohio State narrative of you have to go to Ohio State to go to the NFL will definitely quiet down.
I agree. It absolutely will. This happened with Tennessee in the 80s when they were wide receiver U, and it's going to happen again. And I think it'll happen with Cedric Tillman. Papa J says, what school is the quickest to get to the NFL is their question. Absolutely right. Seen a lot of talk what Jarreau you brought up. Mr. Jones says defense gets more reps to show their skills. And Elias says, if I'm a pass rush specialist, I definitely am down with losing time of possession 2-1. Kind of like you're saying, you don't really care if your defense is giving up a lot of yards and points if you're getting sacks and you're racking up stats.
And you're still going to win games because your offense is scoring 70 points a game. So you can get 3 sacks, give up 50 points, and still come away with a win.
Yeah, that's very true. Exactly. So, Travis, I've got to show this text, this comment. This might be the winning comment of the day right here. If I was a bird, I'd fly upside down over the entire state of Alabama. It's not worth pooping on. Wow. Oh, Travis, that's a great one. Tuscaloosa is nice, though.
Yeah, I was just about to say the Hoover, Tuscaloosa-ish area is not the worst.
Yeah, it's not. Papa J says Columbia is horrible. It's hotter than 3 hells there. I'm not a Columbia fan either.
I completely forgot about Columbia. Everybody says that's their least favorite SEC spot.
Yes. I've heard a lot of that too. Racket.Tom, okay, we're talking about the debate on who things cover. He says they cover Tennessee because it makes them cash, but USC and Ohio State because they're true cash cows. Well, a lot of this, and I am going to say, a lot of this comes down to, for people who are curious about whether or not TV networks are biased to certain schools, they are. It has a lot to do with whether or not they like the coaches of those schools or whether or not there's a personal affinity for the program. USC got a lot of favorable coverage in the 2000s, for instance, because Pete Carroll held open practices. He let everybody come to practice. Didn't care. Media members loved that. Florida State was a media darling because Bobby Bowden was the best interviewer in the business, and the same with Florida with Steve Spurrier. Fact of the matter is, when Fulmer was at Tennessee during their heyday, Fulmer was horrible to interview. It was the worst. He was cliches, a broken record. The we're working like heck to get better. I swear, if I had to hear that one more time at a press conference, I would have blown my brains out. It was the worst thing to hear. But portions of the program brought to you by Vassy Lawn and Garden. Man alive, it's worth the drive, whether you're in Chattanooga, Knoxville, or Nashville. Go to Vassy Lawn and Garden in Cleveland. Sticking with recruiting, Tennessee wasn't the only one to make recruiting news over the weekend. We started the weekend laughing at Florida, and then we ended the weekend saying, Florida is making a huge push. So for those who don't know, Florida lost another player who flipped from, after losing a player to Georgia last week, they lost a quarterback who flipped from them to Ole Miss. And I was ready to come in on Monday, Jarreau, and just lay into Florida and joke about how much of a disaster they are and how much trouble they're in. And then they pick up 4 commitments right after that, 4 elite 4 stars. And now they have the number 8 rate recruiting class, and Tennessee's fallen number 13. Was this just because they did some visits early, so they hit their jackpot this weekend and it's going to fade out, or is this a sign of Billy Napier doing things to come?
I think it's not as big of a deal as people, probably fans, want to make it, just because a lot of the guys were projected to go to Florida anyway, whether they committed now or in November or October. They were probably going to end up at Florida anyway. So I really think Florida just piled all of their, which Tennessee's doing next weekend, piled all of their highest targets and the guys they want and who are priorities in their class in the same weekend, and then just happened to get them all to commit in the same weekend. Because it was some of the kids, like this weekend, a lot of kids went to Tennessee wanting on their official visit to compare it to their other top schools and see what was happening. Everybody except one that I know of went into Florida this weekend, kind of confirming their decision to commit to Florida, if that makes sense. So there was no
Okay, so-
convincing them to commit. It was more of like they had it in their mind already. The only guy that kind of worries me-ish is 4-star defensive lineman Amaris Williams from North Carolina. He was supposed to be on campus next weekend with Tennessee and was one of their top guys. And he committed to Florida this weekend. Aside from him, I don't think any of the other commitments were big surprises.
Okay. Is Amaris Williams still visiting Tennessee next weekend, or has he decided to shut things down?
If I had to bet, he'll probably cancel his visit, but that hasn't been confirmed yet.
Yeah, the only reason I say that is they've already suffered 2 decommitments, so you never know what else.
That is true. And it's weird that after the whole NIL situation in December, that doesn't affect their recruiting at all. Because not just from a money standpoint, I would think just from like how can you trust a school? How can you trust what Florida promises you if they couldn't even come through with, one of the top guys in the country?
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Jaden Rashado had committed to Florida. Florida had promised him NIL money, and then they backed off, and then apparently they didn't have the money to pay. The story behind that, Dave and I talked about this. We know a little bit more. Dave, last year at SEC Media Days, I think it was SEC Media Days, had a couple people telling him that Florida's way behind the curve on NIL. I did a report in my old blog a month later from On3 that Florida had just launched one of the 5 largest NIL initiatives. So I remember Dave and I talking like, what's going on? These 2 stories don't jive up. Well, it sounds like Florida threw together a collective really fast that was a Ponzi scheme. It was a Bernie Madoff-style Ponzi scheme, and they didn't really have the money they said they did. They were just worried about Miami, who had thrown together a very effective collective. So I think that issue is still there with Florida, and you wonder if they got it right. That's a good question. That's tricky why players would still commit to Florida, given that fact, particularly out of North Carolina. But this is early. I got to ask. Now, for those who – the thing is, everybody overreacts in June because you can brag about a top 5 class in June, but so many times I've covered recruiting, Alabama doesn't have a top 20 class in June, and then they have the number 1 class. Right now, they don't have a top 20 class. So do you think it's anything for Tennessee to worry about that they picked up Boo Carter, but they fell to number 13, and right now Stanford and Minnesota are ranked higher than them on 247 Sports?
I don't think so. A lot of the guys, like I said previously, a lot of the guys they had this weekend on campus are recruitments that will probably go the distance. I know a couple plan to commit in July, but I mean, you look at like August, September commitments, even all the way to Kamarion Franklin, who I don't know if he still is planning it, but was previously planning to commit on signing day. So you have a lot of commitments that'll go the distance. I don't want to sound the alarms too early. Another thing is with Florida, they might, if they got the number 1 class, how much do you trust Florida to coach those guys up and be successful on the field, just aside from the recruiting standpoint? Because yes, Billy Napier was good at Louisiana Lafayette, but he hasn't proven anything at Florida yet. So I don't want to sound the alarms on if maybe in 2 years he manages to turn 5 stars into good college football players.
Yeah, and Jarreau, as you probably know better than anybody, Louisiana Lafayette, as a smaller school, you need gas money to get talent there. The smaller players in Louisiana the ones that aren't good enough to play Power 5, they're better in Louisiana than they are anywhere else. And they'll stay in Louisiana if you recruit them.
Yeah, and I mean, there is some – I mean, he did have to, like, build up talent and coach players up at Lafayette. But still, like you said, like, in Louisiana, if a guy isn't going to LSU or another SEC school, he's probably just going to stay in state. And why would he go to Louisiana Tech if Lafayette extended him an offer? So you're right. It's very easy to recruit in Louisiana if you're a smaller school compared to a smaller school in, I don't know, Michigan or Minnesota. But we still haven't seen Billy Napier have success at Florida. And with the schedule they're going to have this year, I don't know if we'll see him have success at all. So it'll be curious to see if he can coach up talent and have turn 4 stars that he all got on the same weekend into college players who can play football.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because Napier is considered like a new Nick Saban, detail-oriented guy. But the thing about that like details versus X's and O's. But the thing about it is Nick Saban has done that, bringing number 1 ranked recruiting classes left and right for years and years. Florida is not really a school, and a lot of people think it is because of the state of Florida with talent. But guys, you're competing with Florida State and Miami and Georgia and Alabama, which get a lot of talent from the Florida Panhandle. Florida's not a school equipped to churn out number 1 recruiting classes every single year. And they're not that top tier job. There's only 3 schools that are equipped to churn out top 3 recruiting classes every year, regardless of the coach, no matter what. And that's Georgia, LSU, and Ohio State. That's it. There's a second tier that can be, if Florida hired Nick Saban, they'd get the number 1 class every year, but that's because they hired Nick Saban. But they can't just hire an up-and-comer and churn out number 1 recruiting classes like that. And so that's kind of the big issue. Notice I brought up Nick Saban. Nick Saban, where did he become a high-profile coach? LSU, which is one of the schools where you can churn out those type of classes. So I think Billy Napier, I don't know what Florida was thinking with this, Jarreau, because historically they've been at their best when they had a schematically skilled coach ahead of the curve.
Well, I think even bigger now, you talk about ahead of the curve. If Florida even wanted to get a top 5 class, they'd have to have a capable NIL collective. That's just how the way football works now. I mean, you look at Texas, got Arch Manning. Texas doesn't get number 1 classes, but they have the NIL to get number 1 classes. Alabama, yes, Nick Saban is a good recruiting pitch, but they also are capable of giving you NIL money. We saw with Jaden Rashada that Florida is not there yet. So why, if Billy Napier wanted a 5-star and went to his collective, or the collective wanted a 5-star and went to the kid, why would anybody trust Florida's NIL collective, whether it's been fixed or not? So that's another big thing with recruiting now, if you want to talk about ahead of the curve. And Billy Napier could bring in good assistant coaches that can get the job done and be schematically good. But I agree with you. Nothing about Billy Napier screams X's and O's and a really good play caller or drawing up amazing plays. So it's a really, I don't know. We'll see, I'm sure, in 2 years if there's another coaching search, but I don't know how much Billy Napier can have success being that detail-oriented guy when he has 3-stars and 4-stars who aren't ready to play.
Yep. So we're both in agreement that this past weekend wasn't that big of a deal, even though Florida had a splash and Tennessee fell to number 13. We think it'll all balance itself out eventually.
If this weekend happened in December and Tennessee fell to 13, then we could sound the alarms, but it's still June. I mean, official visits aren't even done yet. So I think there's a ton of time. And Florida is one of those schools, I guess, like I said, a lot of those kids are just confirming their decisions. You don't see schools like Florida or Tennessee pressing kids to commit. Now, if Nick Saban was pushing a kid to commit that weekend of his visit, then that might be a little different. But I would, especially Florida, I don't see them being in a position where they have the leeway or the leverage to press a kid to commit during his visit.
Yep. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit of national news. We're going to talk a little bit of NCAA and weed. And then we're going to talk about the Pac-12 expansion. So we got some fun things to talk about without Dave here. 2 minutes. Stick with us.
Sun, sand, and salt water, the beach is a very relaxing place. Unless you wear contacts. Ow! Open your eyes to the best the beach has to offer with LASIK vision correction from Campbell Cunningham Laser Center. Ah.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Our family has been creating one-of-a-kind pieces of jewelry in West Knoxville since 1986. Each piece is a combination of unique processes that bring your idea to life. Every day in our shop, a truly special item with a story all its own is being manufactured in our facility, bringing the history and family sentiment into a whole new generation of life. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler, a title that we value and respect. Because to me, being a jeweler and owning a jewelry store are not the same thing. I'm Rick Terry. I'm a jeweler, and we want to be your jeweler. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut, and downtown on Gay Street right next to the Tennessee Theater.
When you want a hard cider that's easy to enjoy, one that's crafted to perfection, you need Tennessee Cider Company. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. With a selection of ciders free to sample, all it takes is one taste. Visit tncidercompany.com for more information, as well as to shop our ciders and merchandise online. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Jumping into the message boards before we move on, Rocky Top Tom says that Florida will not be down very long. It's too easy to recruit there. Agree, but Rocky Top Tom, there's a lot. It's not just how good the recruiting is in your area. It's how tough the competition is. That's a mistake a lot of people have made about Texas over the years. They just think, oh, Texas can recruit because of how great Texas high school football is. True, but you got Texas A&M, Texas Tech, TCU, yada, yada, yada. Elias says Florida will be back at some point, but I think it's going to happen under someone other than Napier, the zero identity team. I could see that. Mr. Jones has an interesting question. Jarreau, how many NIL promises do you think aren't being fulfilled that's causing the flips? Like maybe on a national level?
Oh, on a national level, I don't even think you could probably put a number on it. It's just I don't think a lot of those NIL promises are super big like Rashada's was. So I'm sure schools are offering kids money, maybe not in the millions range, and they aren't coming through on it, and then that kid can just flip to a school of equal talent. But I don't think you'll ever see that with your Ohio States, your Georgias, your Alabamas, those schools who kind of like ironed out the process. And Nick Saban is big on, his publicity and PR and the stuff that goes out from his program. So I highly doubt you'll ever see NIL issues from those schools.
Yeah, I would think so too. Elias says, when the new coach says we're the hardest working team, be afraid. Totally agree. I mean, that's still better than Champions of Life. And APR and APR is the greatest victory in the school history. And we don't look for 5-star talent. We look for 5-star hearts. Old Butch Jones. Travis Gay says he couldn't have been that good if he wound up at Arizona State. I disagree with that, Travis. I got to be honest. Arizona State's led by Kenny Dillingham, who was Oregon's offensive coordinator last year, spent time at Auburn under Gus Malzahn. He's got a pretty good pedigree. I'd want to go play for him, although I would say, I don't know, given the Pac-12 and their issues, which we'll talk about soon, you might have a point. Rugged Top Tom says, Bear Bryant said that a coach needs a 5-year contract and a healthy booster club to become successful. Napier fits that to a T. He needs all 5 years. I mean, this day and age, I don't know if you get 5 years anymore. There's very few coaches who I've seen be successful where they weren't elite by their second year, which is a great sign for Tennessee fans.
How many years would you give a coach, Calhoun?
Every situation's unique, but I don't think any coach needs more than 4, quite honestly. I think 4 is plenty of time to get this right. And, sorry, what?
I was going to say, I think Napier might get 4 just because of how hard his schedule is the next 2 years with the 2024 schedule.
That's a good point. Napier actually might. They probably will do that. But the thing is, it's not like Napier inherited that much of a disaster. I know Mullen wasn't a great recruiter, but Florida was still in pretty decent shape, and they weren't on probation or anything. Like my 4-year, the only time I do a 4th year is if a coach is taking over a program on probation. And so that's...
I mean, Florida was still winning the East pretty consistently before Georgia got dominant. And that wasn't long ago. And then when Georgia started winning, like you said, like right when Napier was taking over at Florida, not too long ago, like they were still 2 in the East. And then this past season, they were just not good at all. I mean, I say he would get 4. He has to win the gimme games, though, which is probably South. You have to get that South Carolina game, I'd say, for him this season. That would be one he has to win.
That's a coaching for your job game between Napier and Shane Beamer. And so,
yes. Those 2 programs that are trying to make that jump. And who would, if you had to choose, Calhoun, would you go Beamer or Napier to take over your football program?
I'd go Napier. I think Napier can actually do the CEO type of things to a certain degree, whereas I'm not so sure Shane Beamer can even do that, honestly. And, the thing that struck me with Shane Beamer that I realized he can't even do the CEO type of stuff is that his offensive coordinator this year for South Carolina. Who was it they hired? I forget his name, but I was very critical of the move because they lost Marcus Satterfield. Dowell Gaines. That's right. Terrible hire. Absolutely terrible hire. And you're telling me that's the best hire you could get after the way Spencer Rattlers finished last season? You would think there'd be some offensive coordinators lining up to take the job. And he picks a guy who was Arkansas's tight ends coach, who was the Jets' offensive coordinator when the Jets were horrendous. I mean, I think this is a horrible hire.
And yeah, I mean, luckily for him, Spencer Rattler's there, so we won't. I highly doubt we'll see if he's good or bad in year one. But once Spencer Rattler's gone, and you have to coach up a new quarterback, I bet that hire will start to show, like you said. Beamer, he has a lot to prove. Napier at least has a track record. Like, you know that he can win. It's just a matter of will he win at Florida. With Beamer, I'm not sure what he has that you can put on paper and say he's the guy.
Yeah, I agree. And also, for the record, guys, Dowell Gaines, I am a Titans fan. He was a Titans offensive coordinator in the early 2010s under Mike Munchak. Swore by Jake Locker. That's all I need. Always swore by Jake Locker. That's how bad of an offensive coach he is. Moving on, I thought Dowell Gaines was high when he was coaching the Titans half the time. And a news story that came out Friday that I'm pretty high on. The NCAA committee, an NCAA medical panel, has called for the removal of marijuana from the organization's banned drugs list. They are calling for more of a focus on PED testing. Now, before people get up in arms, this does not mean that marijuana is going to be legal in states. Like, if you're in a state where marijuana is illegal, that you can still do it. On top of that, I'm still fine if coaches don't want their players smoking marijuana because it does decrease your production, and they want the best production from their players. However, I'm a pretty big fan of this ruling, Jarreau. I think the NCAA should be more focused on enforcing cheating, and who in their right mind thinks marijuana is cheating?
I agree. That's what I was thinking when I first read the story was I bet some of your older coaches who have been in college for a long time will still enforce that rule that players can't use marijuana. Now, I also agree that the NCAA does need to focus on cheating a lot more, and I'm not sure why in the first place that wasn't the foremost thing. Why were they worried about marijuana more than if a guy's using PEDs and potentially cheating and could end up hurting another player, because it's just not fair. So I also agree with the ruling. I think it's good. I do think that a lot of coaches will still keep the rule in place, but I also like that it's not the NCAA enforcing it, because we've seen in the past they can't really be trusted to be fair from one situation to another.
Yeah. What would your philosophy be if you were a head coach of a program? Would you say smoke it all you want? Would you say you can't smoke it unless it's – would you allow for some if there was like pain, like if a player was injured and couldn't play anyway? Or would you just have a hard no marijuana?
I would say same rule as most states, where like if it's medically needed, a player could. I also don't think – I don't know the NCAA rule off the top of my head, but I know that they were not very lenient on the first offense no matter what. So I feel like as a head coach, I might cut some slack there, like if it's a kid it's the first time he's ever done it. But I think I would still stick with the rule where like, hey, unless it's medically needed, we don't need to be doing this. Just because, I mean – you see a lot of alcohol-induced crime and stuff like that from, Georgia players driving 110 miles an hour down the interstate. So why would you allow them to take one more thing that might cloud their judgment? And like you said before, if you want your players to be the best, smoking and doing drugs is probably not the best thing for them.
Yeah. And, I mean, you're right. Georgia players have killed way more people with a car than marijuana has killed anybody. So bad joke. I'm sorry, but it's I don't think it's marijuana that's causing these Georgia players to do what they're doing. And
yeah, so, I mean, and it's just there's no reason to add another thing that could potentially produce bad things. I guess I don't know. You get what I'm trying to say. You don't want to cloud another player's judgment, and then you have more players getting in trouble, and then more players not being able to play because they got in trouble because they're doing something they weren't supposed to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm with your standard. If I'm a head coach, I would say I would have a zero tolerance drug policy, mainly because even with and non-drugs like alcohol, I mean not alcohol, with like marijuana, just mainly because that does decrease productivity on the field. I'm not crazy. I mean, I don't think they can do this, but I try to put a limit on players drinking too, just because I love that alcohol as much as the next person. But when you're playing a sport, you want your body in like peak physical condition, and I'm trying to win. And just for that reason alone. But I would lax it for if you're a player who's hurt and you can get it, and it's medically suggested that this would help with the pain. All right, I could go with that. I think it's crazy that, I mean, so outdated that the NCAA's had this since 1986, I believe, where they were this rigid testing for marijuana. I mean, I know it was the 80s. It was the whole war on drugs, fear culture. But, it's at the same time, it's so ridiculous. And Rugged Top Tom brings up a joke that we could replace our beer barrel rivalry with Kentucky with a weed box. But Rugged Top Tom, that's kind of the funny thing about it. While the NCAA was cracking down on weed and marijuana and not around, Tennessee is rolling out a beer barrel for beating Kentucky and doing victory cigars when they're beating Alabama. So I'm like, okay, so weed's bad, but, let's chug beer out of a barrel or light up cigars, which are also bad. I mean, the hypocrisy behind that was just shameful, honestly.
I still don't understand why PEDs in sports would not be your main focus, especially during the time you talked about when they made the rule. I mean, Major League Baseball was going through a steroid epidemic, basically, where almost you couldn't suspend the people using steroids because everybody was doing it. So why would the NCAA not focus on that the most is baffling to me.
Yeah, that was 86. That was right at the breakout of the steroid era with Canseco, McGuire, and the Bash Brothers, which carried into the 90s and the summer of the Saved Baseball. And Barry Bonds getting mad because he was better than McGuire and Sosa, and they were cheating, so he decided to cheat. And then, I mean, it was just really, 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 it was just a ridiculous thing altogether. And I'm with you. It was so, you're right. They were so focused on weed, and not only did that happen. Jarreau, you were really young when, I mean, you weren't born through most of the steroid scandal in baseball, but you probably don't remember this, but the reason Congress took Canseco's book so seriously was because in the early 2000s, you had stories of high school kids dying because they felt pressure and started using steroids when they were in high school. And I mean, that is just so much more dangerous. And you're right. That's one that gives you an unfair advantage. So if someone's using steroids, well, then the person who's not cheating is at an unfair advantage. And to try to create the fairness advantage, they might have to do something that's harmful to their body long term. So totally with you. They always should have been focused on PEDs. The concept of focusing on marijuana was just a waste of time. I'm reading that the recommendation is a shifting toward a harm reduction philosophy for cannabis, similar to the approaches taken with alcohol. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, so much more issues.
You also brought it up that they weren't punishing people who were taking stuff to make them better, but they were punishing people who were probably doing drugs that would make them worse on the field.
Yeah.
So you're allowing kids who are getting probably way too big, way too strong, and possibly hurting other players, and letting the ones who are just harming their play because they wanted to do drugs or anything like that. And the NCAA, every day I learn something new, and it's just like, that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Well, the NCAA as an existing organization, was it was formed in 1907 because there needed to be a regulatory body to make football safe. Teddy Roosevelt, the great president, was behind it because they were trying to save the sport of football. But once college athletics became the big business that it is, there was no way the NCAA could exist in a competent way, and it's only gotten more and more embarrassing. And look, I don't want to pick on the NCAA here because this was American society in general. When you see so many different American organizations and agencies being this way, I mean, the NFL, I think they still drug test for weed, and it's just stupid and a waste of time. I mean, the fact that Ricky Williams had to retire when he was a heck of a running back at his all-time peak because he wanted to smoke weed, the fact that he had to make that decision, heck, if the dude's performing on the field, who cares? I mean, that's up to the Dolphins organization at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't understand, especially in the NFL, why that wouldn't be organizations, because you're signing contracts with a team that clearly say the rules of why that contract would be voided. So in the NCAA, I get it to an extent, but the NFL at least should let their organizations, because it is a business. I mean, you have general managers running teams, and then I don't know. Everything is behind the curve. You usually see with like organizations like the NCAA, and that's why you have coaches and administrators going to Congress to get NIL help and not to the NCAA.
Right, exactly. And you have, and it's so hilarious to me that the NCAA and the NFL, these money makers, when they sign these TV deals, and all you see are alcohol advertisements all over.
and sports gambling advertisements.
Yes, and sports gambling advertisements, which, by the way, I shared a thing with you and by the way, I'm not against those things. We have alcohol and sports gambling advertisements with our company, with Off the Hook. So I'm totally for it, but for them to take a stance against marijuana is just laughable. And by the way, particularly when I shared a tweet with Jarreau, BetOnline is reporting that all short betting markets are allowing gambling on the Special Olympics this week. I'm not kidding. They're allowing betting on the Special Olympics, but we're going to take a moral stance against marijuana here, guys.
or we're going to suspend players who gamble on themselves to do good.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. Like, you think about it, like with Calvin Ridley, like he was betting on his team to win because he thought they could win and got suspended a season and had to sit out a season of his career.
Well,
that he's not going to get back.
I am going to push back a little bit with you on that, Jarreau. Sorry, because players betting on the sport they play is very much like insider trading. And even with gambling lines, so if a player is betting, when they don't bet, it skews the line because the bookmakers start to wonder, why didn't they bet on themselves? So there's a lot of, this is why Pete Rose is never getting let back in baseball.
There's probably a line to draw there. I don't know. That's a tough one too. I still don't like that they get suspended a year like Calvin Ridley did. I think that was a little harsh, especially if he was betting on the Falcons to lose and him to drop 5 passes. That's different. But since he was just gambling on them to win, but I get what you're saying from the bookmaker standpoint.
Yeah, because that was Pete Rose's defense. Was I only bet on my team to win, and it was like, yeah, but then like, okay, Pete Rose was going to pull in a reliever that shouldn't be pitching in this moment in the game because he needs him 2 games down the road, but he's going to put him in this game because he put too much money to win that game. You see what I mean? So that's kind of,
that makes sense.
Yeah. Speaking of all that, portions of the program brought to you by Zen Sports, peer-to-peer gambling, and Zen Sports is the sports gambling book of the future. It's going across Tennessee. We are really excited with our partnership with them. We are going to have peer-to-peer gambling soon. We are going to start setting odds for you guys, so you guys can bet against us. We can bet against you. Jarreau is going to be the one setting our lines, it sounds like, because Jarreau is the best at setting the lines. So, Zen Sports, we are excited about them. Before we let you guys out of here, some news happened over the weekend. I don't know if you saw, Jarreau, San Diego State sent in a formal request to withdraw from the Mountain West Conference. But doesn't look like the exit plan is going as well as as they planned. And it doesn't seem like there's an offer on the table yet for the Pac-12. So your speculation, do you think secretly San Diego State knows it's going to get in the Pac-12 when it leaves?
I think that they are just playing to see what the Mountain West will do. Almost like a leverage situation. I guess they think they can get into the Pac. My guess would be they think they can get into the Pac-12. So they're going to tell the Mountain West they're leaving and see if the Mountain West will shell out some more money to keep them. And if they don't, then I guess San Diego State will just take their odds with fighting to get in the Pac-12. That would be my guess, since there's not a concrete deal, a concrete public deal. And usually, even if there was a deal, somebody would have leaked it to somebody. So I'm curious to hear what you say. But that's what I would think. I think it's just a leverage thing, because there also were rumors that San Diego State was talking with the Pac-12 commissioner and they were going to basketball games together and all of that. So the talks have obviously happened. It's just a matter if there's a deal or not.
I'm largely on your side because again, it would make more sense just to wait out the year and leave the Mountain West in a year when, they give a year's notice to leave. I don't know why they're trying to leave in a month. And and do that. Do you think that San Diego State is – look, the integrity of these conferences is kind of laughable when we're going to start talking about the Pac-12 on the same level as SEC as both Power 5 when USC and UCLA are gone and they're out here adding San Diego State. But the question becomes, do you think that it could be San Diego State being in the Power 5 could still actually uplift it and help the Pac-12, only in a sense of, are they a sleeping giant in college football? Is San Diego State the program that could be really good?
I don't think they could win a championship, but they haven't been bad. I mean, they've had 10-win seasons. I want to say 4 since 2015, 3 since 2015. And also from a Pac-12 perspective, you add the San Diego area, which will bring in more money. You add another TV area where you can get a lot more money after losing basically the whole Los Angeles area. So I think from a money standpoint, they're not terrible. And I mean, San Diego State isn't bad in some of your sports like basketball, but football, I would find it hard to believe that San Diego State, could ever compete for a championship. I don't know. I would like to hear, unless you think they can compete for a championship, I find it hard to believe if we'd ever see the Aztecs and the Sugar Bowl playing Alabama.
I mean, I low-key see like a UCF out with San Diego State. UCF has just exploded as a football program. Now, the question is, does San Diego State have a Danny White as athletic director the way UCF did for years? But I see a lot of potential there. I also see a lot of potential with, we just talked about it, but with UNLV. I'm surprised that there's not more of an effort to get UNLV around. I mean, everything's moving to Vegas because of sports gambling. You would think UNLV would be a hotbed program that conferences would want.
And you're getting – and every pro team wants to go there. I mean, the Athletics are fighting Major League Baseball to get to Las Vegas. So I agree. I think UNLV would be a big pickup just from – even if they're terrible on the field, you're adding a ton of money just because there will be so many people in Las Vegas. And if they have nothing to do and, I don't know, Oregon's in town, then maybe they'll want to go watch a UNLV football game. It's just – I don't see how – like you said, I don't see how the Pac-12 can keep up anymore with the schools they're adding. I mean, they're not picking up Alabama. They're picking up San Diego State and UNLV. Like, those schools don't really rile up fan bases, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I will say this. If you were a Tennessee or LSU fan, you want the Pac-12 to fold. And here's why. Because you'd rather the Big 12 expand to the Pac-12 than expand east. Because if they expand east, that means the Big 12 is going to target Tulane, which gives LSU a little bit of recruiting competition. And they're going to target Memphis, which gives Tennessee recruiting competition. So you want the Big 12 to expand. You want the Pac-12 to collapse and the Big 12 to go after those Pac-12 schools, the Oregons, the Stanfords, Washingtons, whatever you name it. And so that we're going to have to see how this all plays out. But if San Diego State has a plan to get to the Pac-12 and the Pac-12 gets a TV deal, there's a very good chance that these schools all stay in the Pac-12 because I don't think the Big Ten finds it valuable anymore to expand to the Northwest, which I think that was.
And I feel like you said, if you're the Big 12 or the Big 10, you probably would rather pick up Oregon and Stanford over Tulane and Memphis.
Yeah.
Because those schools have consistently – I mean, Stanford's playing in the College World Series today. And Oregon has consistently been a football team that's near the top, if not at the top. And, I mean, Oregon is a recognizable brand. So why would you not want if you're a conference, why would you not want Oregon over Memphis, who – yes, they're good at basketball and they're not bad at football, but it's just not that. When you say Oregon football, you think of Marcus Mariota. You think of competing for championships. You don't think of, I don't know, no offense to your hometown, but I can't think of a Memphis football player off the top of my head.
No, you're right. Memphis was one of those sleeping giants in football that had a great chance to be a smaller level program, but they never invested in it because they had an athletic director who for 20 years was like, well, we're a basketball school. Well, yeah, but if you want to be a Division I football conference, you got to put money in football. That's the rule with football. But no, I totally agree. But you also really triggered me with Marcus Mariota. I was against the Titans drafting him, and I was proven right. And I'm still mad that we wasted the number 2 pick on him all those years ago when Chip Kelly offered us the entire farm for him. But it is what it is. He is Caleb Jarreau. I am Caleb Calhoun. Dave will be back tomorrow. I want to thank Jarreau for jumping in on this while he's in Omaha covering the College World Series. He's a busy guy. I'm sure he's got to get ready to head there because the game is in less than 3 hours. So, Jarreau, thanks a lot. Have fun at the game today, and have fun in Omaha the rest of the week.
Yes, sir. It's been fun, Calhoun.
Same here. Have a good one, everybody.